Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Heart of the Cast. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, channel's been going really well and appreciate all of the support, subscriptions, and of course, big shout out to Matt Bell for the last episode, which was very, very good. One of our best ones yet. So make sure you do go back in the VOD channel and have a look at that. But this time we've got just as equally of an interesting guest, no doubt. We are here joined by HardlegGaming. Hello.
Hello. Glad to be here. I'm a fascinating man. Thanks for having me on.
You are indeed. You're going to tell us a lot about some of your adventures with rogue decks today specifically, and of course, not forgetting, of course, the co-host, the gamer, the paleo man himself. Both of you just happening to be playing this deck this month. It's Josh. Hello.
Hello. I'm also a rogue Andy now.
Apparently. All right, let's just get started with a little breakdown and introduction. Like, who are you? What's your content? What type of things do you do? What are you known for? Etc. Etc.
Well, I'm a hardleg Joe, if India didn't know. I have a companion here named Critter. He's pretty cool. Critter, you want to say hi to chat?
I was not ready for the sound effect.
He's a cool guy. He always sits like right here off camera. And yeah, I guess right now the thing I'm known most for, I have a series called Ladder Climb. Every month I climb the ladder with a different deck as chosen by my patrons. And it runs the gambit. Everything from like I've done Snake Eyes and Tearlament to Ojamas and Egyptian gods and everything in between.
Oh, so you don't always climb up the ladder?
No.
Okay.
No, sometimes I remember the Galaxy Eyes episode was like, yep, I'm just staying at Platinum 5 the whole time and we ain't going anywhere. That was before the new support too.
Who's voting for Snake Eyes? Like what are these Patreons doing? Like
I just have a wide variety of people. And there's some people, especially I think that was right when Snake Eyes first came out. And I was like, you can't appreciate how good a rogue deck is until you've had that experience of playing like a meta deck, you know?
I wish I could go back to the time where Snake Eye felt new.
Yeah.
Not as bad.
It's kind of like a neat idea at first. I like the idea of like putting stuff in the back row, putting monsters back there. It's neat, but
there are definitely parts about it that are cool.
Yeah, I like Flamberge as like a boss monster. If it didn't float into two guys that also float into more stuff, it would be like pretty neat.
There's a lot of things that we could complain about with Snake Eye, unfortunately, but thankfully not the topic of the day. We're going to be talking about rogue decks and everything about them and in between. And I suppose the first and foremost is, I guess, like you basically just exclusively play Masto, right? Do you compete at all? Do you go to locals? You don't go to YCSs? Nothing like that?
No, there are not good locals in my area.
What are you?
At
West,
least
East, South?
I'm in very Midwest. I'm in Missouri specifically.
Midwest.
Yeah.
That's good, America.
At least back when I played in real life, I think, what would it be now? Like 6 years ago.
Wow.
And back then there were like 2 locals. And one was like mostly populated by kids and not very, like people coming in with like dual discs and like shouting out stuff. And the other one was known for like, if you go there, you have to keep your hand on your deck the whole time because it'll get stolen. Everything was getting stolen. Like so many people got robbed.
The duality of the Yu-Gi-Oh locals. There's the the keep your bag like wrapped around your ankle while you duel locals, and the kids.
The duality is like it's either kids or it's thieves.
Yeah. It's either you've got to keep an eye on everything, or like kids would just be leaving cards like out everywhere. I remember I had to like, hey, you might want to do something. Don't just leave these behind.
So yeah, what's the inspiration, I suppose? Like what I think like a good starting point is really like the purpose of playing Rogue. Like why do we have as players like this fixation on something a little bit outside of the meta, and sometimes that is a willing choice to play the non-best decks?
At least for me, I like the challenge. Yeah, that's why I like Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. A lot of people complain that it's like the most complicated card
Mm.
game, and I'm like, yeah, I know, right? Isn't that great?
Mm.
I love complicated shit. And especially like when I did the Snake Eyes ladder climb, I remember being like almost disappointed because I would mess up combo lines and still kind of fumble my way into wins.
Mm.
And it's like, oh,
You like
this
being
isn't very
punished.
challenging at all.
I think as a criticism to a lot of people who play Rogue, and I'm not saying that this is a major opinion held, but I do notice that for a lot of people, I feel like sometimes Rogue is a way to relinquish responsibility from themselves for
Mm.
not being successful or for poor play.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
it's I think for a lot of people, it's easier to detract from not being good and then saying like, "Oh, well, you only won because of meta deck." You will notice that, yeah, as a good point someone just brought up, there is a lot of elitism. I think sometimes casuals can actually have more than the competitive players, weirdly enough. And it's this sort of like unique snowflake type of, I'm playing a rogue deck. I'm so smart and special. I don't subscribe to the meta beliefs and stuff. But overall, I think,
That's why
that's
you play BA.
yeah. I just don't want anyone to know that I just actually can't top an event. That's the that's the real reason.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, that's part of the reason why I will like kind of push the patron sometimes, be like, hey guys, you got to do something a little competitive from time to time. Let's maybe try out the Snake Eyes, because I do see that in my audience sometimes. Those people who are just like, angry when I'm playing Snake Eyes, like, why would you possibly? I can't believe you've betrayed me. And it's like, no, it's cool to play meta from time to time, and even what I said before, like. Uh, there is still challenge. It's not always easy, especially when you're up in the top tiers, like doing mirror matches and stuff. That
Mm.
can get really intense. But especially in like platinum, like if you're in platinum and you're on Snake Eyes and you're not playing another Snake Eye deck, it's like cakewalk most of the time.
Yeah. I think for me, my biggest attraction is like you mentioned, the challenge. Because when I see people who are like, "Oh, here's my Master One like Snake Eye list," and I'm like, "Okay, well, that's cool. You completed the tutorial. Let's." There has to be something else that's interesting. I think, and anyone I feel like with the right time and effort could probably get Deep Master with the best deck in the game.
Yeah.
But I think Yu-Gi-Oh is most fun when rogue decks are played, and I think the reason for that is because there's such a variety of rogue decks, right? Like there's so many options
Yeah.
out there and playstyles.
I guess this is a good point to for context to just talk about like where we each individually think rogue begins, right? Because I can imagine that we have different slightly different opinions on where the line is of when something is a rogue deck and when it's not. Just so we're all on the same page, right?
Mm.
Like what makes a deck a rogue deck in your opinion? And when you say rogue deck, like where do we start?
Yeah, because I mean, go ahead. You can start us off.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. That's kind of a hard thing because oftentimes I'll go by like tournament results, but
Mhm.
obviously there's not a whole lot of like high-end tournaments on Master Duel. It's mostly like your only real source is like Master Duel meta,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not even sure how reliable that is. Because can't like anyone just kind of put in results like, oh, I got to master with this.
I'm pretty sure you
There is a
can
verification.
just as long as you have like a screenshot of a 5 win streak or something, you can just say I did it with this deck, and then they'll feature it. I think for the most part, I think people are genuine with it, but I don't know how exactly the verification works.
I think it's still a pretty good, decent. Like you look on there and they're like, yeah, Bell and Snake Eyes are the two best decks.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, so those two are obviously not rogue.
Yeah, and then I would say basically like there's usually a best deck or like a couple of best decks,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's what I would call like a tier 2, things that can compete against the meta but are not like the best deck.
Okay, and so that's not rogue yet.
Yeah, that's not rogue.
Okay.
I'd say there's probably like 10 decks in that top 2 at most.
Mm-hmm.
And then almost anything under that would be rogue. Or at least anything decent under that. I mean, I think there is a level underneath like a casual deck
Mm-hmm.
where it's like technically, if you win a tournament with it, they would call it a rogue deck. But if they're asking me like what's viable, I'd say like a rogue deck has to be viable. It has to be able
So
to
it
stand
can't
up
just
against
be
the
like
meta.
a pile of uncohesive stuff. Like that's not a rogue deck. That's just a casual pile of
It's
cards.
just a casual deck. Or if someone's like, "Oh, here's my Dark Scorpion deck," like
I
there
mean,
are some archetypes that just cannot compete in the modern
okay,
game.
so if it's not even like at all feasible, then it doesn't even classify as a rogue deck. So there is a minimum bar a deck needs to fulfill before it becomes a rogue deck.
Yeah, at least to me. I'm not sure how
Okay.
you guys feel about that.
Yeah. No, I can agree with that. I feel like that's fair. To me, I feel like I have an even higher standard when it comes to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, where like I
Mm.
obviously from my standpoint as a very competitive player, it almost feels like if you're not playing the best deck, everything under it almost feels like you're playing a rogue deck. Like I at least I find myself using that term very often for anything that I don't consider like maybe part of like top 3 or top 5 in terms of a competitive environment. So like something that you would just classify as one of the decks in tier 2, I in my head I probably find myself calling these rogue decks sometimes just because like they're not top tier, but
So
yeah.
what was it? I was hearing you talk on stream beforehand where you
Mhm.
were like, "Oh, you may try Centurion." Would you consider that like a rogue deck, or is that in one of those like top tier decks?
It's hard. I'm seeing that now after that. That's why I wanted to talk about it, because like
Yeah.
for me, I would probably say it is, but there's definitely a difference between like Centurion and a lot of other like decks that are definitely rogue decks, right? Like anything like you're talking like I don't know, a Dark Magician deck or something. That is definitely way there's a big difference between Centurion and that.
Yeah.
But
I think
yeah.
a lot of now that I think about it, a lot of the idea of rogue also has to do with like representation.
Mhm.
Maybe that might be another element, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, branded's not the best deck, but I'm not sure if I'd call it rogue because if you play like enough master games, like you're going to run into several branded decks. It's like a tiered deck. It's up
So is
there in
is
the
is
top
rogue
10.
like anything that if you play against it, I suppose you'd be surprised that you saw that deck at all?
Yeah, maybe not necessarily surprised, but something like, if you're going to run a YCS,
Yeah.
you may run into like one of these in
Okay.
your climb, but it would not have multiple representations in the
Mhm.
top like 64 or whatever.
Okay.
So like I would say Paleo is almost certainly a rogue deck
I mean, yeah, I would agree
because
with
it's not something
that.
you're running into all over the place.
Yeah.
But when you talk about like Centurion or branded or what's another deck that's like up there but not like maybe Mathmech
Here.
might be considered like above rogue
Mhm.
because it's something that can still like put up a decent board, OTK through stuff. If you run into it in like Master 1, it's a serious threat.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking like Master Duel, there's like a plenty. I feel like there's plenty of examples. Like I feel Telement also falls into that category. Pearly,
Yeah.
Labyrinth, Rescue Ace. There's a lot of decks that are like not quite up there, but you're not like shocked if you run into them a couple times on a day that you play the game. Like,
Yeah. So that's the stuff I'd put in like tier 1, tier 2, and then
Mhm.
anything else like uh you run into Watts and you're like, "Oh, this is a rogue deck."
See, so the surprise factor does matter to an extent.
Yeah.
I feel
Surprise
like
or just like how often it's played.
Mhm.
Like I might not necessarily be like shocked to see Watts, but it's like, "Oh, I
No,
haven't
I
played this
would.
in like a while."
I feel like I'm very, very loose with the term rogue because ultimately I think you'd be surprised how many archetypes and themes are out there in the world that I think if you genuinely were to just sit and dedicate a lot of time and effort into, and then you put like a good
Mhm.
player behind that time, effort, and dedication,
Yeah.
I honestly would see things like Earth's Arctic, like potentially, at least like day twoing a YCS, maybe maybe topping. Like I think it genuinely is possible. The problem is like a lot of the problem with Rogue is number one, representation. Not just representation in its results. I mean, representation in its community. Like how many numerically
Yeah.
there are people playing that deck, and then on top of that, the quality of the player playing that deck. The people who are spending 3 hours a day crafting decks in the Earth's Arctic Discord channel are probably not as good as the people who are in team circles trying to come up with ways to
Mm.
break the Snake Eye Mirror,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
there's gonna be a big skill divide there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think any deck that isn't in the periphery of the meta is rogue, right? So I would probably still consider Tearlament, Centurion, Pearly, Kashtira. I would still classify those as somewhat meta decks.
Yep.
Um, and basically, I would say that rogue is anything that is just completely off the radar, like something you would be surprised to see. I don't
Okay.
think seeing something like Pearly, Kashtira, Tearlament, Centurion, Rescue Ace. Well, Rescue Ace is actually quite good right now. You know, even I'm trying to think like even like historical decks on Mastodon. I'm trying to think of like Tri Brigade. Like, is Tri Brigade a rogue deck? Like, definitely, right? But that was
Yeah.
not that long ago. The best deck in Mastodon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
that's,
Well,
that's
not that long ago.
That's the thing about like these terms in general, is that it's not like an objective thing, right? It changes over time.
yeah. But I
But
can
yeah,
I can agree with that. That like these decks that I've been mentioning, like these things that most people are like probably agreeing that those are like around the tier 2, that is not quite rogue yet, because you do see them on a regular basis. But I really like that point you brought up about like decks, there being a bigger gap than there maybe should be between a rogue deck and a meta deck, simply because there's like a disproportionate amount of time that goes into exploring the meta decks versus what goes into exploring the rogue decks, because people simply, or at least like the people that could maybe pick up a deck and improve it and make it into a competitively viable deck, they simply don't pour their time into a rogue deck, because I mean, at least from my perspective, I can say occasionally I like to try rogue decks, but it's just the matter of there's so many of them out there. Where do I know, like, where do I start?
Yeah.
And there's like
And
no guarantee that the time I pour into it yields anything. Whereas like if I pour time into learning a meta deck and getting good with it, I know that's gonna give me results. Whereas like,
yeah.
do I start with Earth's Arctic? Do I start with, I don't know, ninjas? Do I learn heroes? Do I learn whichever, right? Like there's like so many decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough to just like
That
decide like I'm gonna be the Earth's Arctic master now, and it might
that
work out, it might just not, you know?
that is the thing I was gonna say is on one hand you are right. There are a lot of decks that are maybe unexplored or underexplored that can maybe perform above their perceived weight class.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
there are also a lot of decks that are like, you can try as much as you want, but
Yeah.
they're just not gonna work. And I think that's the thing is like,
But
I have a lot of
okay,
one.
question. Can
Okay,
you give
go
me
ahead.
an example of that? Like a deck that you think would absolutely, like, no matter how much time, effort, quality you put behind it, it couldn't work. Like, you would have to be naming decks from like decade ago at this point, right? Like
Histina.
multiple generations ago. You don't think Christina?
Suship.
Really? You think Suship is like completely unplayably bad?
I have seen a lot of people try to do Suship stuff, and like the best you're ending on is like Utopic Future Dragon, and maybe like an Ash or like a Hand Trap or whatever. It's every time I've seen that deck, like it can put up something where it's like, yeah, that's not awful. If your opponent doesn't have a great hand, you might be able to win. But when your best thing in the modern game is like 2 negates,
I guess
it
the
just ain't
question
doing
here,
it,
I
Chief.
guess the
You ain't
question
gonna
here is
win.
like the question, what is the standard you're trying to reach, right? Like how good do you need to make the deck for it to be worth your time, right? Can you make it win locals? Does it have to be able to like day 2 a YCS or top a YCS? Because I'm pretty sure you could probably make a Suship deck that can win a locals
It depends
on
on
a
your
good
Probably.
locals,
day.
doesn't it?
Yeah, but I would consider
Yeah.
locals like a casual environment. Like
Exactly. That's why
the difference
I'd say
between
like
the
that
rogue
wouldn't
and the
be my
casual.
standard when I pour my time into a deck. Maybe for someone else it is, right? For someone else that'd be completely fine. It's probably a very rewarding experience, honestly, to probably make
Oh
like
yeah.
that's what I've been going through with Paleo, right? I've been working on my Paleo deck for a long time. I've put a lot of time into it, and I've turned it into a deck that can win locals. I won locals with it last week. I don't think I can turn it into a deck that can top a YCS. At least at the moment, I don't really believe in that, right? So I'm not spending my YCS prep time on Paleos.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, I think, an important thing to like always mention whenever we're talking about this. It's like different people have different objectives when they play Yu-Gi-Oh! Some people like the theming and having fun is way more important than like winning all the duels or topping a tournament or whatever. So it's like if you like Ursartic, if that's a deck that you're like you really enjoy, then yeah, go ahead, have fun with it. Like don't let anyone put you down for playing those kinds of decks. You just have to be realistic about, I think no matter how hard you try, you will not get day 2 on a YCS with our Startix. I don't think you'll get top 64. I don't think you can get master rank at all with our Startix.
At all.
That deck is, I was like, maybe master 5? Like, I don't know, maybe if you grinded like, that's the other thing about Master Duel and why it's kind of a difficult barometer, is because like in order to get to Master, all you really have to do is have like a 51% win rate and play a lot of duels. Like if you play long enough, you can get almost anything into Master, but like realistically, are you going to spend like 40 hours a month playing Master Duel?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's again, I think it's that big divide in quality and time and dedication. So I think is probably a good part. But I think something we can all agree on is the challenge aspect of playing a rogue deck is really cool. And I think one of the problems is like probably just Yu-Gi-Oh as like a whole, right? It's there's only really one way to play the game, and there isn't an incentive to try other things, right? I think the best example is like Time Wizard Edison, right? Because historically, people played like Jeff won with his deck, for example, as the SJC Edison or whatever it was for the last SJC event. He played that deck, he won with it. Years later, now today, as many players have been exploring that as the most popular alternative format, people are realizing that deck actually sucks. Like there is way better decks. So it's interesting just how like if we were to be afforded more time to play a current format, then maybe there would be things that we could find and and explore that would actually result in us discovering some things.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean that is just the nature of like Yu-Gi-Oh formats always being on a timer. I do agree it's a very interesting process whenever a historic format gets picked up by the community and basically being played for a very long time, way longer than it would have ever been played in that time period. And there's always, no matter which format you look at that has been played as a retro format, there's always discoveries that are being made that are new and maybe even groundbreaking to that format. But here's the thing, like in all of these formats, these discoveries didn't happen simply because it's timed, right? Because there's so much out there that you would have to try, that it's almost always more efficient and more, it promises better rewards in that time when you just focus on the stuff that is going to be good, right? Whereas like for example, like to use your example, like I'm sure Jeff Jones didn't have time before SJC Edison to try like what the thousands and thousands of people have tried over years now to reach the conclusion of, oh, actually this deck is the best in Edison. Like if Jeff just
what do you mean? Just play Blackwing. That's it was that simple.
Yeah, I mean that kind of goes back to what you were saying about rogue decks. Like maybe there are some rogue decks that are like top tier contenders, and we just don't know because why would you put time into like learning all this stuff?
And that's another point that actually you bring up that I kind of also wanted to mention slightly is you have the time that you put in, but here's an interesting thing. There are some rogue decks that are really difficult to play. Like
yeah.
So I'm trying to think of like a couple of examples. I'm trying to
Valence.
Yeah, I mean that's probably a good one as well. Someone mentioned Fluffle in the chat. Fluffle is also like weirdly like very difficult in how you sequence things. There's like
Fluffle
a lot of
top something recently as well.
I don't know about recently, but Fluffle has like definitely seen a couple of like results over its time span for sure. But
Plant Link, is that still up there?
I mean, it's Plant.
I mean, it got second at UK Nationals, right? So
yeah.
And that's like notoriously complicated. Just like Jess is the only one who's really mastered it.
So it's all of these compounding factors. So it's like, okay, I need to dedicate more time. I need to also be better than an average player, right? Because if you think about it, if I'm going to beat Snake Eye with a rogue deck, if they misplay, they can still beat me. Whereas if I misplay, this game over, right? Like, yeah.
The margin for error is very small. And that's another thing that I think a skill that a lot of rogue players don't understand is like, in order to beat Snake Eyes, it really helps if you've played Snake Eyes a bunch.
Yes, preach.
Yeah.
Because then you know exactly where all the choke points are. You know, every deck seems invincible when you face it once or twice, but whenever you play it, it's like, oh, that just shuts me down. I never would have thought about that.
Yeah.
It's a huge advantage to like, you know, people say, I don't want to play meta, I only want to play rogue, and I like my pet deck, and I hate the meta. It's like, you bring up a good point. If you practice the meta deck, you learn what the weaknesses are. You see where the choke points are, and you can use that to your advantage as a rogue player.
Yeah. That's why, again, I'm very grateful that the patrons allowed me to play Snake Eyes at the start of the format. Because, you know, going through playing Paleo now, a lot more rewarding when I know, like, everything that Snake Eyes can do, and they're just, like, completely predictable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you, like, what's your resources for this stuff? Like, how do you come up with a build for, you know, like Dragon Maid in this day and age? Like, where are you getting your card pool from, your tech ideas, your combos?
Well, I have a very specific, like, method when it comes to building decks. And the first thing I always do to start is sit down with the archetype and just read every card in the archetype. And I try to blind build a deck first. Because I feel like that gives you a good understanding of everything the archetype is capable of. And sometimes when I'm going through that, I'll, like, think of a tech, or I'll find a tech, or I'll come up with something that'll be unique and it'll actually, like, work out. And then once I've got that baseline understanding, it's going to YouTube, because there's deck profiles for everything. There's, you know, no matter where you go, there's a one trick playing that deck who has a million deck profiles.
Yeah.
I actually go in the opposite way. I think it's better. I mean, I could be wrong, but what I found is taking something standardized, like just straight up just fully copying and net decking.
Yep.
Starting from that point, and then start to deconstruct, and then find all of the other cards in the archetype around it, and then go from there. That's what I think has been.
It might be a personal preference as well, because that is also how I do it. But I also feel like there's definitely an enjoyment in trying to figure stuff out yourself. So I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
It might just be easier. Maybe it's not necessarily the better or more rewarding way to just take a list that's already been tested and then maybe make improvements on it even further. But like, it feels like the easier way to pick up a rogue deck is like, because, you know, even though there is a huge, we talked about how there's like a lot of time that goes into exploring meta decks, you'd be surprised how like every single rogue deck has people out there that actually put a lot of time into that deck. You know, like, it might not be perfect or anything at that point, because maybe they don't try to make it super competitive or anything like that, but there's like resources, I feel like, for every single deck. At least I don't remember ever trying to look up a deck and not finding anything on it.
There's different amounts of resources for every deck. Like, I just played Odd Eyes, and as far as that goes, there's like one guy. It's like,
is it Triff?
No, there's a guy, he calls himself Entertainer, and he's all themed over, like, he really likes Arc 5.
Oh, okay, and, that's actually pretty cool.
He's like climbs the ladder every month with Odd Eyes and has a different list every month that updates to, like, go against the meta. With, like, these are the tech cards that are specific to help this time. But then, like, you know, you go with Earth Machine or DDD, and there's spreadsheets. There's whole communities. You could find dueling book, like, replays and everything.
That's the thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, the best example I bring of that is, like, I randomly took interest into Dragoonity one day, and then I joined the Dragoonity Discord, and there's like, here's the Master Duel channel, here's the TCG channel, here's an Excel spreadsheet of Remus plus discard, 6 different versions of Remus plus discard, Remus plus 2 discards, quick launch plus dragon, like, just, and I'm just like, why should I bother unless, like you mentioned, Josh, like, for some people that is the fun of, like, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? Why do people do jigsaws, right? Because I guess putting those pieces together and figuring out yourself, like, is actually a fun process in and of itself. But if I do want to try and make my pet deck good, well, here's a bunch of resources. I should just start from there.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's unfortunate because, obviously I get paid to play a different rogue deck every month. So I could like afford to do it. But it is something that like I think I would love to do this on my own time, but if I wasn't making money off of it, as generous as the pricing is on Master Duel, it's not enough to free to play make a new deck every single month. You've usually got to dedicate, and I guess that's another element of it, right? Like it's not just the time, it's am I going to spend the money on this rogue deck knowing it may not necessarily be able to perform at the top levels until I experiment with it.
Yeah.
And someone in chat mentioned a good point. Like those spreadsheets and stuff could actually be suboptimal. That is true. Which is why I think, as a criticism to net decking, it is important that like, you take everything with a pinch of salt, right? Like you do.
You got to fact check it basically, right? You got to like you still got to acquire the knowledge of the archetype and then be able to like think about, is this actually the optimal way to do it? But that's also a very fun learning experience as well, right? Just start with like, because I can imagine those are the moments where you really are like, damn, I really learned something about this deck. When you look at like the spreadsheet from the Discord about the deck and you're like, I think I can do some of these things better.
Yeah. And that's I think that would go back to why I prefer trying to sit down with the deck beforehand. Because especially there's some communities, and I think MBT's talked about this, where they get into this group think, this insular thought, where someone tops with the deck and it has these ratios, and then those get like locked in as these are the ratios you have to play, and nothing exemplifies that more than Galaxy Eyes. When I was looking up that, there's a community for it. I could find tons of deck profiles, and every deck profile is like, you play 2 of this because it's a 2 of, you play 2 of this because it's a 2 of. And I'm like, why? Like, this should either be at 3 or 0. Like, why are you playing 2? I don't understand. And no one could give me an answer. They're like, that's just the ratios our community plays.
That reminds me so much of the first thing I thought of when you said that was there was a couple of people that played Chainburn in some of my Challenger Cups. And it felt like, first of all, I was surprised that there was even one person playing Chainburn, but then when it happened the second time, I got suspicious. I was like, what's going on here? And they were all using pretty much exactly the same ratios on the cards, which is like super specific for a deck like Chainburn. And then I found out that there is a Chainburn community for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And they all play like pretty much exclusively the same list of someone that managed to top a regional with like a blind second Chainburn list, who's now treated as like the Lisan Al-Gaib of Chainburn, and they all played the exact list of that person. Which on the one hand is really, really cool, but on the other hand, it's funny to me because that's exactly what I thought of when you just said that about Galaxy Eyes.
Yeah, and it's something I'm actually seeing in my paleo ladder climb. Is I looked up a bunch of decks, and almost all of them are based at least somewhat off of your deck.
Yeah.
And now that I'm playing it more, I'm starting to look like, is Rise to Full Height really, really worth playing at 3? Is it as good? Like, I know it's a good stall card, but maybe something like Threatening Roar plus Wabaku might be a better option.
No, I'm using Wabaku as well, but yeah,
yeah.
That's the one thing I like about my journey with Paleo is, of course, a lot of people are picking up the deck now, but I still have a lot of people go back to me and be like, what do you think about that trap card or that tech card? I mean, they suggest different tech cards. It just happens that most of them are traps, but it's just like, because Paleo is a deck that plays so differently from other decks, there's a lot of cards out there that you never really look at, but they become good in the context of this deck. Like, that's how I found about Elemental Burst, for example. That was a card that I didn't think of using. And there's a lot of other examples where I've been playing like weeks of Paleo, and then someone comes up and is like, what do you think of Elemental Burst? And then someone else brings up, like, there was someone who topped a regional in Belgium with, or Netherlands with the Soldier Dragons. That's where that came from. So it does feel like, even though I feel like I had a big part in popularizing it, there's still, it feels like a huge group effort to get the list to where it's currently at, because like everyone throws in some random tech cards.
I will say my random tech card of choice, Ferret Flames, Not
See,
necessarily
that's
great
cool.
against Bell, but
Yeah.
like if you want non-targeting, non-destruction way to just wipe the entire board of monsters,
Hmm.
especially with the fact that you're paying half your life
Yeah.
points with transaction like it's easy to get down to like 100 life points and
Yeah.
then it's just free.
Yeah, I can see that. That's cool.
What do you think are some ways for rogue decks to be popularized and be more explored? And I don't think I would say the answer to that question personally is like Konami needs to probably do something about it to incentivize these things. But I guess like from the Master Duel perspective, there is a lot of like events and stuff that happen, and it is kind of cool to see like random strategies suddenly become like actually really good and excel in certain festivals and stuff.
Yeah. It would be kind of nice to see some of those events maybe taking place in like real life. Like it's kind of weird that everything's been all about the Time Wizard formats and they haven't done like an Ixie festival.
Do you want a real life Synchro Festival?
No, not that one. They can skip that one. Most of the other like Fusion and Ixie are like, oh, those are unique things. And Synchro Festival is like, well, I got a book sitting around.
Let's have a
What's wrong with
respect play
Synchro
YCS.
What's wrong with Synchro Fest? Is there a deck that you think of that? Like, what's bad about it?
The thing about the Synchro Fest is that Synchro decks are inherently just like big combo decks. Like, yes, there are a lot of Fusion decks and Ixie decks that can become combo decks, but like during the Ixie Festival, I was playing Generator. Like, that's an Ixie deck. It makes Ixies, but it also does a whole lot of other stuff. It plays a different game than something like Kashtira or something like Teller Knights or whatever. But when it comes to Synchro, it's like your only option is to just shit out as many monsters onto the board as you can. And it feels like it doesn't matter if you're playing Monadium or Speedroids. It's going to be the same, like, sitting for 10 minutes and watching the setup.
Yeah. So in terms of real life, I don't know how aware you are of this, but at the local level, there are it's officially known as Heart of the Underdog is a thing that a lot of locals run. I don't know how popular they are around where you are, or in general from some people in the chat here. But each local who does these tournaments has their own customized ban list and stuff, and I don't think I've seen much, like, what's the word, popularity around them, or just exposure.
Was a Heart of the Underdog like a specific format, or was it just you could do whatever?
It's just the idea of we're banning a lot of meta archetypes from it, usually, is like the gist of it. And it's like the community agrees on, okay, we're taking out Snake Eye and Ubel, but like what else, right? Like, and then maybe you even progress the list further after 3 weeks, everyone keeps winning with a certain deck because that is now the best deck after you've eliminated all those. So we also ban that. We don't have that over here, but I'm familiar with the concept and I think it's quite cool.
I think the problem with almost any format like that, where it's like a community-driven ban list, is it just feels so like unofficial. It just feels like you're at the whims of whatever's popular, whatever the people around you are. It kind of, in a way, it helps that Konami is so unreachable because they almost feel like a force of nature. It's just like, well, that's the ban list. That's what it is. Like, but maybe we don't like it, maybe we don't agree it, but there's nothing we could do about it. It just is what it is. And once you get into those custom formats, it can be a little bit like, it would be good if you get too much into micromanaging it. That being said, I did have an idea for a format that I always thought would be fun, that might be something people can try with their own Heart of the Underdogs, which was basically use the same ban list that we have currently, but roll back the set releases a year. So, everything, basically you're in the heart of Snake Eye format, or not Snake, I guess, what was before Snake Eye? Cash format?
Unchained,
yeah. You're in the heart of that format, but all the cards that are broken about it are already banned.
Yeah, so your format is just like the ban list, but if it was on time.
Yeah. The ban list if it happened on release, essentially. And that feels a lot more, it's not someone making a judgment about it. It's yeah, Konami has acknowledged that these cards were broken. What would it be like if they were just banned on release?
Yeah.
What other decks would stand a chance?
I don't hate it because I mean that's one of the main criticisms that we have of the ban list is like very often stuff just happens too late. What if Verte was already banned during DPE format or whatever, right? Like it's like
Yeah. And I mean, you could even do that just like, oh, if that's still too close, roll it back 2 years, roll it back 3 years.
Let's
However long
play
it takes.
Edison format with today's ban list. How about that?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest issue at the local level with this kind of thing. You do just need like an authoritative figure to just be like, here's the ban list, live with it, because you do end up in a situation where there could be biases with like the community driving the hits and stuff like that, and also just a case of, well, I mean, the irony is all of the people who don't want to subscribe to the meta and hate playing meta decks, well, when you have Heart of the Underdog being played week after week, guess what? A meta starts to develop, right? Like, so it's hard to really come up with a solution that works with everyone. I will somewhat self-plug here, but I've been really enjoying the LCS series like that I've been doing. For anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's every week we ban every deck that tops. So we're up to about 7,000 cards banned now.
How long has it been running for?
Over a year. The last episode dropped yesterday, actually.
What's left?
The only archetypes that haven't topped are Umbral Horror, Maleseverus, Earthbound. Yeah, just complete like rubbish like that.
Like out of all the archetypes out there?
Out of everything in the game, yes. Those are the ones that still...
Dude, okay, so those are the worst archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! You figured it out.
Yeah, Dust Dawn, Cypher, Steel Swarm. Steel Swarm has been played by someone for a month and they can't top with it. It's so sad.
Has Dark Scorpion topped yet?
Oh yeah. Dark Scorpion is like a OTK deck. Like you creature swap, you jackpot 7 them, and that's it.
So it is a rogue deck.
Jackpot 7. Okay.
It is a rogue deck then.
I always use that as an example of like a deck that like has no defenders, that can't win, that's like, from so early in the game that it barely counts as an archetype. But no, it's not the worst.
It's better than Umbral Horror.
Yeah.
So that's
better than Malice Boris.
So that's the thing, I guess, is like the ability to take this sort of like progressive ban list that you would have to organize at the local level to like create like this. It's like a macro question on Yu-Gi-Oh! In general of like, the Master Duel ban list versus TCG ban list, right? Where it's like more frequent hits versus less frequent hits but more impactful. And I guess like what's a system that could be in place to encourage this type of play. I guess that's kind of the tough question. And I think a big issue as well is YCSs in Europe, for example. There's like 4 maximum per year. We've had like 3 or something, or obviously last year we had 2. That was nice. So when you don't have a lot of events, when you don't you need to make the most of it, right? So if I'm only going to get like 3 YCSs, 4 YCSs in a year, then I have to play the best deck because I want to make most of my time. Whereas if you're in America and you're able to travel and you get like, 2 YCSs per week, like you can maybe afford to play something fun. And I would love to see maybe Americans perhaps like try and pioneer rogue decks a bit more than we do over here potentially. I don't know.
I can definitely.
I don't leave the house. It's scary out there. Have you seen America?
Okay, that went not the way I expected it. Okay,
that wasn't fireworks down the street.
Okay. But I feel that I agree. Like if we had more events, I feel like I'd be more willing to maybe be like, you know what, I'll just enter this YCS with this rogue deck that I really like, even if I probably won't do well. But doing it when we have like 4 a year, it definitely feels like there's a bigger, like there's more pressure involved with each individual one for me specifically, right? Like if we had like 8 or something, I'd feel better about like, I mean, going to one with Paleo maybe just for the content, But yeah.
But I think that's what's so impressive about like your Eurotop, for example, right? Because that was a no pressure event for you. You were deep into Snake Eye format, and Ubel, and it was like, fuck it, I'll take Whitewoods, which I guess like by all intents and purposes really is just like a rogue deck, right?
Yeah.
And you still managed to top with it. So I think like that harkens back to the initial discussion of like, well, I mean, if you do put like good players and time effort into a rogue deck, like there will be results. And I don't know, maybe Whitewoods is a good deck, perhaps. Maybe it is
a
just the
good
case
deck.
of the current
It
format.
is a good deck.
You would say
agree.
that. You would say that.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? If you needed to win this event, or if you needed to enter the playoff, I don't think you'd play Whitewoods.
No, probably
correct?
not. No.
Exactly, right? So that's the problem. I think it's like the pressure behind performance detracts away from creativity.
Yeah, that's what I meant when it's like it's all about the time that we have in a certain format to develop these things, and when you have the pressure of performing at all costs, quote unquote, right? You need this event is like your only chance to get the worlds or something like that, right? You're gonna use your time on the things that look the most promising, and not on the things that would be the most hype or coolest to perform with, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although this is almost an entirely other topic, but I the whole topic of pricing, I feel like, well, I mean, if you win, we gonna get a Switch or something.
Yeah.
Might as well play something goofy.
So
what are the stakes?
I think the problem is a lot of people don't care about the pricing, but now that Worlds points are a thing, every event matters.
Yep.
The prestige.
Well, not the prestige, just like you have to accumulate points to qualify to the World Championship at the end of the season. So,
what's the prize for like winning Worlds?
a very expensive Yu-Gi-Oh card. It's still not cash or anything like that, but yeah. Josh, of course, still keeps his in a safe, locked in his bedroom, of course. Two Switches? Oh, shit!
Nah, you get no Switch at Worlds, but you get a Switch at a YCS, alongside some other stuff.
And a playmat.
That you also get, yeah, definitely.
Exciting.
But yeah, I don't think the prizes is what keeps people from playing rogue decks, right? It's like I guess you could look at it from your angle and be like, well, you know what? Like the prizes are not as impressive anyways. Might as well play a rogue deck, right? But like I feel like that's we're circling back to that discussion, right? But that's not why people try hard for these events. It's not like they need a Switch that badly on this day and it's sold out everywhere and they need to get it there, and that's why they play Snake Eyes. It's like people care about it for other reasons, but yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like obviously it's fun to win, but I feel like because the pricing is so bad, the main reason that you want to play, the main reason that you want to go is to have fun. And oftentimes the rogue decks are like, I would much rather play Paleo than play Snake Eyes. Obviously, if there's a monetary incentive to play Snake Eyes, then I will. But if it's not that big a deal either way, like, yeah, I'd rather be known as like the guy playing the fun deck. Because then if you do happen to top, it's like a huge big deal.
So you're like high risk, high reward. My chances of doing well are very small, but if I do,
it'll be remembered forever. Like that time Jareel played Exodia at Worlds. Still remember that.
Yeah.
Hope for escape, iconic. Baby.
I think that's one of.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say it helps that he had a red mohawk too. That was.
Did he?
I believe so, unless my memory is just fading.
He had something going on with his haircut. I don't remember exactly what it was.
I just have this very distinct memory of like, oh, here's the two competitors, and it's like this shy, nerdy guy looking down, and then it's just like Jareel and the red mohawk, like, come at me, bro. I was like, one of these has charisma, and it's not the other guy.
I think the trap sometimes with, and this happens a lot with the branded community. I love calling them out as this exact example. But some people like to make a specific archetype their personality. And I don't know, I feel like there must be a lot of pressure to like, okay, I'm the, the hero guy or the fur hire guy. And like, I need to like top, or I need to like do well this event. And, it's very limiting in its in that type of way, but also just very it could be very off-putting, maybe for some people outside to like play that deck. Like unironically, I really wanted to play Branded. I did, but they were just so insufferable. Like you can't have a discussion about tech cards. You can't talk about like it's always just like, no, you're wrong. You have to do the combo like this. You have to play this rate, and it's like, okay, like you just you can't reason with these people.
I guess it's a matter of it's probably harder said than done. Easier said than done, but like you can just still play the deck your way and try to ignore those people, right? Which I know from I mean I know how it is to ignore a Twitch chat when you're playing a certain rogue deck, right? I will never play Mikanko ever again for this specific reason. Because it's like literally, I don't know, my opponent can set up like 10 negates to my 1-card hand and I scoop the game and everyone's like, what the fuck are you doing? They were so dead. Right? It's like, yeah.
All right. Well, in terms of the difficulties of Rogue, I think we've explored a lot of the aspects of that. We could maybe talk a little bit about the costs associated with Rogue. I think one of the most one of the biggest reasons, of course, that I think attracts a lot of people to playing Rogue decks is, of course, they're generally quite affordable.
Mm-hmm.
At least in real life. That's one of the big kind of differences between TCG and Master Duel. Yeah. No, that's the thing. In Master Duel, every archetype, no matter what, is going to have URs. Yeah. It doesn't matter how dog shit your thing is, especially if it's a newer deck or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to play Mikanko, that's like 7 URs or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's like a special. Or like Paleo, or right? Like you've got to get the transaction rollback, you got to get the time tearing Morganite.
Well, Paleo itself has like 1 ultra, but yeah, it's true. Like no matter what archetype you look at in Master Duel, most of them, like their boss monsters, are always going to be URs, right? Whereas like even if in the TCG they make a certain card high rarity for your deck, it'll still be low cost, even if it's a secret rare, right? Like if your deck is a rogue deck, then the secret rare is going to be like $2 compared to a 80 euro engraver or whatever it is at the moment, right? It's like still, even if they have the same rarity, it's not the same.
Yeah, if no one's playing it. It of course it depends, because obviously like Blue Eyes players, if you want to play in real life, that's the Magia. How much is that sitting at now?
Last I heard it was like 600 or something.
Yeah. So that's one of the few exceptions.
Yeah.
But it's one of those...
By the way, random question: is that card optimal? Like, should you be playing that in a good quote unquote Blue Eyes deck?
I don't know.
I will not give you an answer, because otherwise the Blue Eyes community will find me and kill me, no matter what I say. Like it's gonna be wrong, and I will probably die.
Blue Eyes is one of those decks that gets requested every month. Patrons always put it in. It hasn't won yet. I know one of these days I'm gonna have to do it, but so far I've avoided learning it.
So I think I wanted to bring up something that I feel like is like such a problem with some rogue decks, where it's like you have like the very cheap like archetypal cards, but then occasionally you have something come along that is so necessary and so game changing for the deck. Like SP Little Knight last year, I think it was probably the biggest example, right? Like there's just no deck in the game that wouldn't play SP Little Knight. So to take a deck that's costing you like $50 to then essentially triple it just because of like one singular extra deck piece that you need. The Fiendsmith engine is also ridiculous. Like, it is criminal to not want to play that in something like, I think like Ubel. I wouldn't say Ubel's a budget deck, like, but as an example, you're taking an engine that just feels so mandatory, and then you're just like doubling the cost of your deck because of it.
I remember when I got really into Runic Goatee last year, I liked it so much on Master Duel.
Hold on, I need to like I need to double back for a second. That's a deck name. Like,
oh, you haven't heard? Runic Goatee is great. It's way better than like you would think it is. Because the whole idea, right, is that Goatee's going to synchro during your opponent's turn, and the runic cards let you summon monsters that like change up the variables. Oh, you think they only have the ability to make an 8 and then you make a 10 and banish the whole field or something like that?
I'm just baffled by the fact that you haven't heard of Runic Goatee yet, because unironically, this is for how different our experiences are. Because people come into my chat at least once a day. There's someone asking me what I think of Runic Goatee.
I think there's a reason I stay away from those runic cards. See, I don't know about you guys, but I play runic the optimal way. Okay, I'm putting Imseti in my deck. I'm putting Skill Drain. I'm putting There Can Be Only One. You know, I play good runic cards. All right.
I just want to say that the last couple of podcasts, whenever runic was mentioned, it was not me that brought it up. I just want to I just want to say that before, you know. But I think an even better example of what you said, or at least for me, was always prosperity, because it felt like as long as prosperity was expensive, it was like a card that went into so many different decks, and it was like, although not mandatory, right? It was probably possible to play your rogue deck without it. It felt like a double punishment, right? Yeah, your deck is already worse. Like your rogue deck is a rogue deck for a reason, and one of that reason is usually, I mean, tied to consistency very, very often, right? And like now your deck is already less consistent than meta strategies, but it also has to skip on prosperity, right? Because that's not in your budget. Because why would I spend $300 or whatever it was on a playset of prosperities if I'm putting them in a rogue deck? And that felt very very weird to me, which is why I always felt like it's way better practice to make the staple cards to your game cheaper and rather have like specific archetypes be expensive, if anything, right?
Yeah.
But,
I will say this is completely off topic, but I'm not. I like doing like little card design stuff. I'm not sure if you've seen any of that on Twitter.
Like
you a custom card, Andy?
Customs?
The not custom cards. I like to do what I call like hypothetical time, where you have a card that's like, okay, draw 3 cards, pay X number of life points. What is the most life points this could be?
Okay.
And have it still be like worth it, where it can still see play.
I remember that question. So the answer to that, in my opinion, is 7,999.
That was my first instinct too. I was about to say
that one's a pretty easy one. But what I was thinking of, because you just mentioned prosperity and how good it is in rogue decks, but it's unfortunate that it plays in meta decks. So I just thought of like, okay, what if you had essentially the same effect as prosperity, but it's like when you activate this, your opponent can declare 5 card names. You cannot activate those cards for the rest of the duel.
Can I just say, I hate like cards that take like 10 minutes to resolve. Like, first and foremost, right? Like grass looks greener, like literally being like an entire duel in and of itself, where you're resolving 7 chain links. That's what the vibes you're giving me.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is my opponent activates Prosp, assuming like you're assuming I don't know what they're playing yet, right?
Yeah.
So
or even
like,
if you
it's,
do know,
let's say it's game one. Let's say it's game one in the tournament. They activate Prosp. What even is like? Let's actually think about this. What do you call? Do you call like 5 cards from like the top 5 different decks that would play Prosperity?
Probably, right? Like you call like, do you declare like Flamberge, Biden Dragon, or Chandra or whatever, and then declare like Spirit of Yubel?
If I'm going in blind, especially on Master Duel, I'd just be like, Maxi, Ash Blossom, Called by the Great, Nibiru. Like, just pick the top 5 most used
you're
hand
probably
traps.
going second, and then they're just comboing on you, right?
Oh yeah, I guess that is a good point.
Yeah, because you're going
it depends
second.
on what your hand is too.
I guess if you have a hand trap, you say Called by and cross out or something. Like you have Maxi, dude. You activate that Prosperity, and your opponent says Called by, cross out, and Ash Blossom. You already know you're getting Maxi.
Yeah.
I think another good question. Like, go on. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I guess the other thing would just be like Appaloosa, IP, Baronne de Fleur. Just name a bunch of like extra deck cards.
That's a fun thought experiment.
But but that would be one where it's like, then you get rewarded for playing a rogue deck. Because, if they don't know you're against Paleo and they call a whole bunch of monsters and stuff, it's like, well, they might declare Zeus, but almost anything else they're going to put in your deck is not going to do anything.
Yeah. It's a funny thought experiment, but I guess what you're saying is they should make cards that maybe specifically don't go into meta decks, but rather go into rogue decks, right?
I think it would be neat if they found a way to do that, because that's the perennial argument, right? Whenever you talk about Maxi specifically, people are like, man, Maxi would be great if the meta decks weren't allowed to play it. Like if it was actually a catch-up mechanic for the decks that can't special summon 10 times. But unfortunate that the deck is going to special summon 10 times and then drop Maxi on you in your standby phase.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there are examples of where they've tried that, which is usually just tied to very heavy restrictions, right? I'd say like one example of when they tried this that has kind of backfired is Card of the Mice, right? Which was just like, okay, when that card came out, it was like there weren't many decks that would take that restriction. They would be like, okay, I need the special summon, right? I don't want to just set my whole hand. There weren't many decks out there that did that.
Yeah.
And then people discovered how good it is with floodgates and kind of ruined it for everyone. And now
traps.
Card of the Mice cannot be at 3 because yeah.
But it's one example where I think they did it pretty well is Ties of the Brethren.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great, like, if you've got a specific rogue strategy, there's a lot of decks where, like, yeah, I'll give up special summoning and 2,000 life points and my battle phase to just get 3 monsters out of the deck that maybe have good effects.
That was sick in
with each other.
muskets. That was the musket cards. I remember that shit. Oh, Magispectors, yeah, I remember they played that as well.
Yeah.
That was funny.
Ash. Oh, Ash on the Ties is so awful.
Yeah, so I guess it is a matter of sometimes they do release a card that is really only good in a couple of rogue decks. Like Card of Demise in the beginning was like there were decks that played it. Like, I don't know, Cosmo had a Demise build to it. I think Cleaford was a deck that played it. So like, yeah. But then of course we all know the type of continuous traps that usually went with Card of Demise. So.
And it's the same. I feel like Extravagance at the time they released it, it was kind of like all the good decks were good extra deck focused, and it was like, oh, there was a rogue tool, and then almost anyone was like, oh, you just play 3 of your main cards, and then almost any deck can play it.
Yeah, just buy 3 Chaos Angels, and then you're fine.
Is it still at 3 in TCG?
TCG?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, they hit all the draw cards in like Master Duel.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to have all of them at 1, specifically the one. I mean, I don't mind Prosperity being at 1 because it's by far the most powerful. I don't know if I agree with Desire's Duality and Extravagance, but yeah.
Can't believe Duality of all things.
Yeah.
I think Best of 1 just changes it up a lot.
Dude, just hit the freaking floodgates, man. What are you out here hitting Pot of Duality for? 2011 ass card, man.
I will say Duality is weird in that it started as like a generic staple. Like at the time it was released, it was good in every deck.
Yeah.
And over time, it's become that thing that's, if you don't special summon, your rogue deck can use this.
Yeah.
I don't know, like even like modern decks, some of them have can play Duality, right? Like just there's disproportionate amount of usage between it. Like you can absolutely play Duality in Labyrinth. You can play it in Flu, of course, is the most notorious example.
Is it worth it in Labyrinth?
The people have been playing it.
Heavy trap versions of Labyrinth without much of the furnitures that actually use it. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the best build's the furniture build, right? Or has that changed?
In the TCG for sure. It's been a while since I've played it in Master Duel, but in the TCG I like the furniture build. However, there's the math Labyrinth, which is actually quite solid.
I haven't heard about that one.
It's the one that uses the card isn't out in Master Duel. I'm not sure if you're familiar and if you're keeping up with all the TCG releases, but it's the there's a new version of that linear equation cannon.
Oh yeah. I saw that. I really wanted to use that in Paleo.
And the new one
really good.
Yeah, the new one is like actually good in like Labyrinth.
Yeah, because it's easy to do the math with that one, unlike linear equation cannon.
Yeah,
it's harder.
It's
linear equation cannon is just y equals mx plus c, whereas simultaneous equation is it's a simultaneous equation. So
the thing about the linear equation cannon is that it depends on how many cards are in the graveyard and how many cards are on field.
Yeah.
So there's 2 variables that you can't necessarily control.
Yeah.
So it makes it almost impossible to resolve in a duel.
Oh yeah,
the other one
is just bad. Yeah. That card is just bad. It was a fun gimmick. I wonder if they intended for the second one to be actually useful. What do you think? You think they made it solid on purpose, or they're like out there now and being like completely surprised that people are actually using that? They were like, we're making a joke.
I got so much shit for this, but I specifically do not like a card, like I said, that takes like 10 minutes to resolve, okay? Like you got to verify with your opponent, you have to explain to your opponent the math, you both have to like check it, make sure there's no issues there, and then you can like especially if something gets chained, that changes the number of cards on the field on resolution, blah blah blah. So I think no. I don't think they like wanted that to be like an actual meta relevant card. I could be wrong, but it feels like that. Nah, there's no like Small World is like the peak of complexity, quote unquote. I think that should be in a singular
Peak of
card.
complexity. I mean, that story checks out. I've seen you play the Small World minigame.
Yo, heroes are broken for that. Just saying.
I still get confused with Small World. It's I
Really?
would get it because what was it? The thing that I always forget, and then I like try to read it, and because it's what was it? It's one
It's the
card.
stats that get me.
They have to share it, but they can't have two in common.
Yeah,
but
it's
they
just
can have more than one in common with one of the cards.
No,
No.
the bridge has to have one thing in common with the start and the end point. That's it.
But the start and the end can have multiple things in
Yeah,
common.
the start and the end can have
Yeah.
everything in common. It's just like the middle card has to have one thing in common with each of the cards.
Yeah, and that's the thing I always get like tricked up because sometimes I think like the bridge can have multiple things and I get the wrong one or something.
Look, man, the
I don't
fact
know, I'm
that
just stupid.
I'll just say, right? You guys go to Small World's Yu-Gi-Oh API on the optimizer. You can upload your deck list, and it gives you the answers and questions of how to resolve Small World. So the fact that a tool like that even exists in the first place, I'm just saying, you know, people think they're very smart, but listen, if someone coded an entire website to find the answer to these questions, you know. Anyway, slightly more on topic. I have a point that I did want to bring up in question here. So,
Oh, okay.
here's something that I found. One of the more, frustrating aspects of building a rogue deck sometimes is. So I found this example particularly relevant in Dragoonity when I was trying this. So I was trying to play Dragoonity, trying to improve upon it, make it a good deck.
Mhm.
And then as I'm tuning it, and as I'm trying to make the deck better and more consistent, very slowly I'm just like, okay, well, what if I play like a couple of rocket cards? What if I maybe cut down a couple of the other Dragoonities?
You see where
And then
this is
very
going.
slowly but surely, I'm just like, well, this rogue deck is just a straight up just worse version of this other deck, right?
It's just Dragon Link with
Yeah,
worse cards in it.
exactly.
Mhm.
And it's the same with like Blue Eyes. For I feel like Blue Eyes is a great example of this. I'm trying to like play like a combo Blue Eyes deck. Very slowly, I'm just like, well, I'm just cutting the Blue Eyes cards and just playing more like Dragon Link related cards. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Untamed Yubel is also probably a good example. It's like, oh, here's like a fiend pile. Okay, Yubel's good. Let's play a little Yubel engine. Okay, let's make the Yubel engine more consistent. Oh, fuck it.
Yeah.
I just cut the Unchained cards. I'll play one
No,
Sharvara.
why is there only one Sharvara left in my deck?
So I think that's a big issue with a lot of rogue decks is they can just feel like worse versions of the better decks.
Yeah, that's something I ran into with the Odd Eyes build that I just did. Was like, it's a pendulum deck. You can play. There's so many pendulum support cards, and people are like, well, you got to put some Performa Pals in there, And while you're out there, put in some pendulum magicians, and then maybe the Zark stuff, and you don't got enough room, so maybe remove some of the Odd Eyes cards. And there's so many decks also. I think this is kind of a tertiary thing where it's like, I remember Morphtronic where they're like, oh, they've got all these cool like combos and you could do this and you could do that. And then you end on your board and it's like Barone Appaloosa. I'm like,
oh
like
my god,
there's-
look what I made.
Don't forget IP.
I feel like there's an easier way to get into this without using this. To be a rogue deck has to be, in order to be fun, it has to do something original.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, not to go too hard in on the paleo, but that's what I love about paleo. There's not really much risk of it becoming something else.
Talk to me about paleo all day. I don't mind.
Yeah.
I had
Except
like
Tierlament, I guess. The tier paleo.
I love that version. That's my favorite version, Loki.
Yeah.
I just can't play that tournaments because the well, I don't know if you can call it paleo tier. Really, there's like it's really just Morella.
It plays very few paleos, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Morella, Dynamicious, and like a Leon Colia maybe, but yeah, can't play that because of the time rules, unfortunately, with rollback.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like
Master Duel.
What do you do with that type of logic? Like, is it like, do you force yourself? Okay, well, I need to play X number of Blue Eyes cards for my deck to be really classified as a Blue Eyes deck. Remember Lightsworn as a meta deck in 2016? People always used to be like, Lightsworn, by the way, it's like 3 charge and a Raiden.
Yeah.
You know, so
I mean, people do that with Fiendsmith right now, right? It's like 5 Fiendsmith cards in a 40 card deck. Or 4.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is like with so much rogue stuff, it's kind of like just down to personal preference. If you're playing rogue to begin with, you're already playing an unoptimized thing. It's just a matter of how much fun are you going to have. You know, do you want to make your deck? So I had a one trick who was all about gladiator beasts, and he basically ended up playing Tri Brigade.
dude, but like that deck is sick. Genuinely, like some of the Enfields of Gladbeast is so good.
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
I actually played that one.
The like modern Gladbeast stuff.
Well, it was in Master Duel, but it was I think it was someone topped the tournament with it, and I took it, and I played it on stream a couple times, and I couldn't figure out how they were winning games with it because I kept not doing that. And then I found out that they played a tournament where everyone plays multiple decks, and you're never forced to actually play your secondary deck. So presumably they always played the first deck and just had Glad Beast as like, because the first deck was like Ishizu tier, and they were like, well, I'm always gonna play Ishizu tier and never gonna bring my second deck. So
See,
this
is what Quantal does. He says like, oh yeah, I won Worlds with Sky Striker.
Exactly.
But, you know,
yeah.
conveniently missing out the information that his primary deck was, you know, full power tier.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, I wanted to get into some like I suppose more interesting areas because I think we've tackled most of the problems of Rogue here. I suppose. Well, I suppose like before like some interesting questions that I had, so we could probably focus on one like final topic. But I think it's quite obvious, but the advantages of playing Rogue. What's in it for that? Do you think, Hardleg?
Just your opponent has no idea what you're doing, which is the best. Yeah. There's nothing more anime than playing a card and your opponent doesn't know what it does. Like, that's the quintessential thing of, like, they activate that, oh, what is that? And then their whole field gets banished. And they're like, I didn't know that card existed. That's part of what makes Paleo so great. Hitting transaction rollback and hitting fucking judgment scales for 8, or hitting evenly match while you have nothing on the field.
Evenly with nothing on field is insane, by the way. Yeah. There's a dumb interaction.
Just for context, before people post it in the comments, because I get that question like every time I play Paleo on stream, you can copy evenly with rollback, but you have to still do it at the end of the battle phase.
Yeah.
You still have to fulfill the activation requirement, because everyone is always like, why don't you just play evenly and copy it with rollback? It's not that simple.
Yeah. Same thing with Witch's Strike. You know, you have to fulfill the requirement first. They have to negate. Which I've been trying, and what was it? The thing that annoys me about Witch's Strike is it has to negate specifically the activation. So like you can't activate it when they ash you.
You can't do it on ash. Yeah, I've pulled it off though. I cite that card in versus Voiceless Voice, and since that deck has an Omni negate once per turn every time, I've pulled it off against that deck.
Yeah, I almost did, but unfortunately they made, what was it? They had the big ritual guy, and then they also made Dragite. Every once in a while, you find someone who does immediately know. They're like, oh, I've played this. And they make like SP and like a spell trap negate. It's like, fuck.
Wait, how does Voiceless make Dragite live? Or was it not versus Voiceless?
No, it was Voiceless. I don't know what they did.
What kind of water do they even have?
Oh, wait, no. They were Voiceless, and I think they had some of the new Ice Barrier stuff in there, too.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Just like a bare minimum package to make a couple synchros.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the not knowing what your deck does is very funny when it gets pulled off. Like, I was playing Raid Raptor, was it yesterday? And my opponent goes second and he activates Imperm. But I had a Raider's Wing underneath one of my monsters. He couldn't target it. But because Master Duel forces you to activate the card, he had to Imperm some random nothing, and it was just very funny.
I mean, that's like I can't even count how many times my Opabinia has been ashed or my Animal Acaris has been Veilered. That kind of stuff.
Paleo's the worst for it.
I have a counter on my stream, like a read counter for every time someone activates a monster effect on a paleo.
But here's
Paleo's
the thing.
definitely the most guilty.
Here's the thing. Two things. Of course, it feels great when when you activate a card and your opponent doesn't know what it's doing. But in real life tournaments, I feel like it feels like a double-edged sword sometimes, especially when I play with Paleo, because like your deck goes down in life points so much. And it's like, okay, well, my opponent is taking every one of my cards and reading them, and it's like I can't really blame them for it, but at the same time, dude, my deck sucks in time, so can you please hurry up and not do that?
Yeah.
But it's like at the same time, of course, they have to do that, you know. But it's awkward. It's not their fault. It's not really my fault. It's just like an awkward thing that happens. And from a competitive standpoint, it never feels great to me. I mean, it feels good winning a game that I had no business winning, maybe sometimes. But the feeling of, well, I know that had my opponent played well, they would have won, is, at least from a competitive standpoint, not great. Because like you don't want to go into a tournament where you're like, well, if my opponent's good, I'm gonna lose. Which is, yeah.
Look at it this way, right? Like, couldn't you just apply that logic to every single duel where, well, the better player who played perfectly should win? But then at that point, you're just comparing hands. So
yes,
yeah,
to an extent, I agree with that. But like, the thing is, sometimes when I'm playing Paleo, I can play as optimally as I want, and my opponent can make some mistakes, but it still is not enough. Whereas like when I'm playing when I'm playing a meta deck and I'm playing well and my opponent is only playing okay, like there's not even a question of who's going to win sometimes, right? But it's like with Paleo, it's like, well, dude, I've grinded them out for 8 turns and now they've top decked another Snake Eye Ash or something and I don't have an answer to it, and it's like, okay, well, you know, that felt kind of pointless.
I saw what your opponent's top deck wanted when you had put them down on nothing. It was very funny. Yeah, so that's obviously one of the downsides. It's like on the competitive front, you want to feel like you won your game because you deserve, not because your opponent didn't read your card. But
you want to be in control, basically, and you're not in control of whether your opponent is going to make a mistake, is, I guess, my best way of phrasing it. Is like,
yeah,
with a rogue deck, you have less control over it. Of course, you can expect a lot of your opponents to make mistakes, which is why it still is a working concept. But yeah,
I think it's important to have a deck that doesn't rely entirely on your opponent's ignorance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the great thing about Paleo, is even if they do know how to play around it, you know, that
I like
makes
Hardleg.
it
Can
more
we have
interesting
him more often on
times.
the podcast? I like how every second sentence is, this is why Paleo is great. You want to come back like next week's episode or something?
I might be able to find, maybe not next week, but I can find some time if you want.
Okay.
Just have, we could have a Paleo fucking podcast.
I've just been play, you know, the deck that I play for whatever month is always on my mind, and this one is just, it's been so damn fun. I
mean, bro, it's always on my mind too.
I just love I love decks that can play during the opponent's turn, and there's nothing that does that more than fucking the all trap deck.
Someone said replace Farfa. Can I just say, I actually love Paleo. Like, I genuinely really enjoy that deck. But the thing is, like, I don't know how you guys feel, but like as a content creator, there's certain archetypes that just feel very sacred, right? Like certain people's decks, you can't like replace them for it. You know, I was trying to play like
Paleo.
I give you permission.
You
but
get
it's
the
like,
Paleo
you know,
pass.
You don't want to encroach on some people's territory. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, that's the thing, is it's always out of my hands what I play, because it's all the patrons. So I've just kind of like completely gotten rid of that.
Oh, so
my fault, man. It's the money.
Did Paleo win
dude.
your Patreon thing last month?
Yeah.
Oh, sick. Okay, let's go.
It was close.
Whatever you do,
Paleo
do not become a
Centurion.
politician.
What,
Please
me?
do not get into politics. Yeah, no, because just the Patreons, man. What can I say? The money. They told me to put these policies in place.
You can't take donations from companies. Only take small donations from the people. They're your real bosses. You gotta do what they want.
Like a Rolex from Aiden Ross, if you saw that.
I still just can't get over the fact that, like, have you seen that where like the Grinch is hiding in the background?
No, is this like some?
There's a thing where Aiden Ross is presenting Donald Trump with a Tesla that has his face on it.
Yeah.
And he like opens the door and you look through the door and just briefly you can see the Grinch like leaning over and then he ducks back. And after like, you know, all the political talk was just like, is that the fucking Grinch? What is that doing back there? If you've seen it, it's the most inexplicably like, the fuck is that?
That was by the way, can I just as a really random IRL subject, like it's 2024 and we have presidential debates being decided over which streamer they're collabing with. That's, you know, we gotta get Kamala on the Joshua Schmidt Paleo stream. All right. Anyway, I wanted to ask some random questions here. What's your most favorite rogue deck ladder climb thing that you've done?
I think
Sounds
at
like
the
Paleo
moment-
so far, but what else has been up there?
it's close up there. I think Goaty is still more favorite. You know, I was always a fan
Nah.
of Cristrons, and Goaties are just the new Cristrons.
What
They're
does that
Cristrons,
even mean?
but what
Well-
is chat saying?
Can I just say something you said about Crystron, by the way, or something a little bit earlier was the idea that you have these like boss monsters that are basically just, you know, I'm trying to play Morphtronic, but technically the optimal way to play Morphtronic is to just end on Apollosa, Baron, etc. So one thing I really like about some decks is they have like strong boss monsters. I think that's always like a good starting point because I'm not playing Crystron to end on these generic boss monsters. I do want to go Quarian Gandrax, banish my opponent's cards. I do want to summon Phoenix and banish all their back row in the end phase, etc., etc. That's a really cool point, and I think that's like one of the best things about some rogue decks because ultimately, yeah, a lot of rogue decks do just kind of turn into this is the best skin for this generic extra deck.
Yeah, and that's I will say it's the same thing with Generator. I think if I had to have a top 3 right now, Generator would be up there as well, just because it's got that unique boss monster in what's its name? I want to say Lopter, but Lopter's the little one.
One of them is Levitin.
Yeah.
Leviathan,
What
yeah.
I think Levitin is the one that you go into after you make the other one. There's like this rank 9 that you tribute to attach your opponent's cards to your Levitin.
That's Leviathan, yeah.
Oh, Levitin is the one you tribute.
Yeah, it's Levitin, and then you
Jormungandr
go
something
into
is the other one.
Jormungandr.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one you go into, the big snake that
Yeah.
Isn't
I
that
just
one
love
really
the
old?
fact-
You still play that one?
Yeah, that one's old because it's the best. You have to have a target for Levitin, I think.
Yeah, it's Levitin
Oh, okay.
it's an Ixie, it's 2+9s, and you tribute it, and then it's summon an Generator Ixie from your extra deck other than Levitin, so you have to say Jormungandr.
Yeah.
And then it's attach Ixie material from your opponent's field or graveyard up to the number that was on Levitin.
Yeah.
Does not target.
And it's a
And
quick
so it's
effect.
great to just, it's a quick effect. So just
you
being able
summon
during
that
your
going
opponent's
first.
turn, be
Yeah.
like, I summon the world snake and it devours your field.
It's
Yeah.
very cool thematically for sure.
Oh yeah.
It is
I
also
wasn't,
a
like-
generic rank 9. So like if there's
Think
ever a
so,
deck
yeah.
that spams rank 9, that's like one of the options out there that you can just go into, which it's a very strong piece of interruption. Just attach your opponent's cards non-targeting.
Yeah. That's up there with like the Madolce card as far as like I'm not sure how you power creep something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty timeless, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I will also say I think one big appeal of any kind of rogue deck, any deck that's going to be a favorite of mine at least, it has to have a boss monster that has a fun to say name. Yeah. You got to I summon Quarian Gondrax. I summon Jormungandr, the world serpent.
Not like a 60-year-old Scottish grandma like
Yeah.
Beatrice.
Beatrice, she's all right.
Lady of the Turtle is a good title, I will say. I think some of my favorites over time have been, of course, BA, but I guess that doesn't really count because it was a meta deck that just became rogue somewhat. I did really like playing Crystron in 2016, 2017. That was like, it was pretty cool. I'd love to revisit that sometime, but I feel like banning Hulk of Fibrax unironically did kind of hurt that deck a lot.
With How gone, it's pretty much dead.
which is really sad. I hope they do some erratas, like requiring a Crystron, summoning a Crystron tuner potentially could balance it.
There was a time when I thought it would be cool to like, I mean, they still have a card that searches like Crystron spell traps, and there's no Crystron spells. So I'm like, they're ripe to give it some more support. Yeah.
Well, there's a certain Necros searcher that
spell?
does the same. No, apparently not.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I was just wondering that there's not a single Crystron spell card.
No, there's a field spell, and it's called Crystallic Impact.
Oh. Okay.
So it doesn't have Crystron. And also, it's kind of garbage.
I mean,
it's
that's
just like,
kind of implied.
It's like, if you summon a Synchro during your opponent's turn, you can draw one card. Like, it's a little bit late at that point.
That's a third of a fountain.
Yeah.
It's so annoying how like some of these decks are like specifically designed just to be worse, right? Like you read some of these, like you read something like Fountain, and then you read like something like that, and it's just like, well, you just wanted this to just be bad. It's
So what you're saying is we need more fountains. We need more cards like Fountain.
We need more cards that do what their working
I don't know. I feel like that's what you said.
do.
I think that's a fair summary of what you just said.
Yeah, that wasn't a big stretch at all, for sure. What are some of the best ones you've played, Josh? Of course, other than Paleo, or most fun rogue decks?
I mean, rogue decks in terms of like Paleo is. I'm kind of in the same position as you with BA because that deck did not start as like a rogue deck probably in 2017. I guess you could count it as a rogue deck compared to Zoo.
I think initially it was for sure, right?
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I mean,
weirdly very broken.
Yeah.
It's a rogue deck now. You know, you're like a reverse hipster.
You haven't tried anything else?
It was cool.
I'm afraid that if we don't count tier 2 decks, I don't spend that much time on actually playing rogue decks. I do want to though. I've been planning to make content about like trying to get the most out of a certain rogue archetype. And just like try to build it, get into the theory for it, like spend some time on it, bring it to locals, get my opinion on it out there. Right, I have a list of some stuff that I want to try, like including stuff like the Mimighoul cards or the Madolche cards or something. I guess Lightsworn is a deck that I've been playing around with already when it came out. I guess that counts as a rogue deck. I mean, it's not anywhere really in the TCG format at least.
Rogue,
that is one of my favorite archetypes that's been released recently that isn't meta. So I guess from recent memory, those are like the ones.
It's not a very Josh deck.
Lightsworn?
Yeah.
It's a very nostalgic deck for me. Maybe that's why.
Because I feel like the only way to build Lightsworn is to just make it a Wombo combo deck.
I made it a runic deck and one local with it. So.
Oh my Jesus Christ.
Dude, look, you just mill all the runics and then you draw with Fountain.
Brother. What's some of the absolute unsalvageable, unplayable decks you think just do not have a world of a chance to get good? Why do you have this real disdain of Suship?
I've got a couple patrons who just really, really like Suship, and they keep trying to sell me on like, no, it's good. You got it this time. Look, now you can make the Armored Ixie stuff. I'm like, okay.
Can I say
I can make that in addition to UFD? And they're like, no, you gotta choose.
I don't understand why there's such a big Suship community, because I feel like at an absolute base level, what is the deck? It's just summons a rank 4. I can't think of anything more vanilla in Yu-Gi-Oh! Than I'm gonna make a rank 4.
But it's sushi cards. You gotta understand. Yeah. It's hilarious.
They want me to go out there with the chef hat and the like little.
What's the theme? It's just sushi. Why is that so crazy? Why is that so cool? Like, it's just food. Like,
people like puns. Puns are like, if you can make a pun deck, people would go crazy for it.
Oh, dude, wait till we get the Baklava Golem deck. I'm just saying.
Baklava Golem.
Let's see. I had another list of like all the decks that people kept suggesting, and I was like, no, absolutely not. The other one, fucking Weather Painter. I like me a good slow deck, but that's bad? Too slow. I don't think it's bad necessarily. I mean, it can make some neat stuff. It just takes so long.
I'm pretty sure I've lost to Weather Painters.
Yeah, dude, like when Weather Painter gets going, it's like unbeatable. Like genuinely unbeatable.
If it gets going, that's the problem.
Well, they got going that one time. And then I got going.
It's legitimately one of the most ridiculous link monsters. Like
Yeah.
it's so crazy.
It's kind of like I used to love Ghost Tricks. Ghost Tricks were so fun, and
Yeah.
maybe you can still play them, but it's just the longer that deck was around, the more it became about stalling.
What
And
kind of
yeah, if you
version did you
stall long
play, and
enough,
what year? Like, what type
I
of Ghost Trick we talking?
so for I think 5 years I played it every Halloween, and every year I
This is
switched. So
standard content creator.
I made a mill version. I've done the burn version. I've done the beatdown version. I've
What's the
done the
beatdown
version
version?
that it's you make Ghoul, I think his name.
Yes, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the first decks that I fell really in love with randomly at local was Ghoul OTK. So for anyone who doesn't know, because who the hell knows what Ghost Trick cards do? There's like Ghost Trick is a very old deck, by the way, just for context. It's like Shadow Spectres 2013 or something.
Yeah.
So what you do, there's a Ghost Trick monster that when it's flipped, it gains the attack of all of your other Ghost Tricks. So basically, you just set up with like 5 set Ghost Tricks, you flip them all up, and then Ghoul gains all of their attack, and you just like one shot your opponent. That's
Yeah.
that's the
You've got
deck.
that.
It's
You've
so
got
shit.
the field spell that lets you attack directly with
Yeah.
all monster, but it's like all monsters except Ghost Tricks deal half damage, and most of the Ghost Tricks have like no attack. But if you get like 2, what's her name, the so cute, not so cute boss, the Angel of Mischief, that has like what 2,000
The rank
attack.
4.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
rank 4. You can easily get 2 of those plus Ghoul plus something out, and it's like, well, now you're attacking for 5,600.
You know
that,
what's
just do it 2 turns in a row. You're fine.
Ghost Trick brings me to a random thought here. And have you ever like seen some of these archetypes where they make and they design cards for some of these rogue decks that just don't work with the deck? Like they're so antithetical, right? Like that's been one of my frustrating things. Like for like one of the things that I really loved B Troopers first wave of support. I really liked that deck. I played it a lot at locals. And then they made like, oh, here's a fusion with 5 materials. Like, how did you read? Why? Who asked for that? Like,
They love making fusions these days on a random like archetypes. It's like there's
Yeah.
like so many decks. They're just like this deck needs to be a fusion deck.
yeah, I don't get it. Like, it's very perplexing. It's like, what was the design logic here? Like, did you play this deck or what's going on here?
Yeah.
There's a lot of really bad examples of this. Yeah, like Subterror like has a link monster that is just like that's not how Subterror is played. Like,
Can I use skill drain to summon it, or why does it make sense?
do you know what it does?
No.
It's a link 2, which I think just quick effect flips monsters.
I don't
It's
think
like
it's even that good.
it's really good in Prediction Princess, not in Subterror.
That is a red flag right there.
I think it's I thought it like searches a flip monster or something like that. It's like it's not great. I
Dude,
mean,
if it was a link too that just searched the flip monster, you'd unironically try to use that in like Mimighoul or something.
It
could be
searches
generic,
a
yeah.
flip, but I think it takes 2 flip monsters to make the link, and you also have to like send a card you control to the graveyard to search it.
That's
Oh,
like
great.
not even good in Edison format.
Yeah, we should probably look
It's
this
a
up before we talk so bad.
Or like, yeah, I think changing the playstyle is like one of the most egregious like offenders of this type of thing, right? Like Altergeist, I think, is a good example, right? Like that is very much
yeah.
a control deck.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, here's a bunch of like combo link stuff. Like, it must be weird as someone who really likes that deck, right? Because generally, I think people pick up a certain deck because they really like the playstyle.
Mhm.
And then here's some support that completely warps and changes the playstyle. It's like, that's very odd, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Like, as someone who plays that deck, could be like, well, I actually don't like this support, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know.
I think what was it? The example of that for me is I used to love playing Spirits. That was like one of my first like old school rogue decks when I started playing. And then they
Creature Swap?
released with Creature Swap with
Hell yeah.
what was it? My version of the deck was basically it was full of like Gores and Tragodia and Battle Fader. So
Mhm.
you would just let your opponent like set up everything, and then when they go to attack, you negate the attack, and then you summon Dark Dust Spirit and blow up the board.
Yes.
Mhm.
And you would just basically do that like 3 turns in a row. Like they would put a bunch of resources into making something, and you'd be like, "No, denied. Also, your board's gone. Get out of here." Um, and then maybe you'd set another monster or get another spirit. And there's another spirit that's also a level 6 that you can summon. You could special summon it by banishing a spirit from the grave. So, after you blow up their field twice, you like summon Dark Dust, then you special summon this, overlay for 2 level 6s, and you make like Photon Strike Bouncer. And it's like, well, you're down to 1 card, and I've got a monster to gate and 4 other cards in hand. So good luck with that. And then they made the rituals, the ritual spirits.
Shino
And it
birds.
just, the Shino birds. And it felt like they just completely took over the spirit playstyle and completely changed it from like this resource deck that was built on bouncing to the hand to this almost all or nothing, like not quite an OTK deck, but like you go in, you clear the board, and then you just put like a rock, like a mono on the field.
I guess there's like 2 ways you can look at this situation, because it's like there are certain decks where their playstyle has just aged very poorly, right? Like an example of this is spirits, which are completely based on accumulating advantage over multiple turns. Well, guess what? Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't really like that anymore. Or like Altergeist is another example where, well, you're a trap deck, and trap decks are not great at the moment in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So you've got 2 options. Either we're going to change the identity of your deck, making it into a different kind of deck, but allowing you to play with the archetype that you know and some of the cards that you know, or your deck just remains unplayable. And I guess but it keeps its identity, right? So that's like the, I guess, pick your poison kind of thing, right? Like your deck either is unplayable or it's going to have to change its identity in some way.
Yeah, I gotta choose one or the other. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear that weird? For some reason, my printer decided it's going to clean itself now.
We can't hear it.
Is that a
okay.
thing? Self-cleaning printers?
Yeah. It like
What are they
cleans
cleaning
the heads
themselves
or
of?
whatever. The little like ink heads or whatever, it like washes over them. But if you can't hear it, it's fine.
This is an old man thing, but why? What do you have a printer for?
Taxes
I think
and stuff.
Taxes and shit.
Yeah,
But
like I have to print out stuff. My state is like, they're so worried about fraud. They're like, no, you got to print out everything in paper, and you've got to send it in, and you've got to do all this paperwork. It's the same thing. Like if I want to get my like license renewed or whatever, I've got to get like physical paperwork and bring it in.
Because like when I was growing up, we would use printers to like, print out like maps to like go to places. Like, that's what a printer in the house was for. So
yeah, I mean, it's also like a scanner or whatever. Sometimes I draw stuff.
What are you scanning? Oh, drawings. Okay, fair.
Yeah.
That's Farva discovers people have hobbies.
printers are rogue among the electronics of the world. You don't see very rogue.
Here.
Need some legacy support for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I completely forgot what we were talking about.
No, I think we're basically done.
Yeah.
Unless there's any other points to bring up here, I suppose I can maybe go to the Patreon question.
Yeah, let's have
now.
a Patreon question or two. But this was a fun talk about a couple of very like off the wall topics and decks that I haven't heard about in a long time.
Yeah, I want to just like sit down and just talk about random archetypes. I think that would be really cool.
I did put
like
the Subterror link into the Discord if you want to see the exact thing. It's worse than I remember.
2 flip monsters. Gains attack equal to the combined original levels of the Subterror monsters used for its link summon times 100. During your main phase, you can send a flip monster from your deck to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon a monster from your hand in face down position to your zone this card points to. Once per turn.
This seems like good.
If a monster... Well, I mean, you're foolishing a flip monster, though.
To summon from your hand, which is like, if you're making a link within a flip deck, how many flips are you going to have in your hand? I guess if you got Pot of the Forbiddens, but it doesn't flip it up.
Send Shaddolls, that's pretty cool.
Oh, right, Shaddolls are flip monsters.
That's when it was used. I remember MBT had like some sort of weird Shaddol variant that made this.
Flip Shaddol, like actual flip cards. That's That's also a weird thing, right? Like, isn't it weird that Shaddoll was like a meta deck? Like, it's a flip deck, but it was never played like that.
It's because they quote unquote cheated on the mechanic by all having a graveyard effect too, right? And that was the main like bonus that you were doing, and you only occasionally would end up doing, like, setting a monster. I guess it was a successful attempt, though, at getting people to play flip monsters in 2014, because there were genuinely games where you would sit on a set monster and then flip it on your opponent's turn with shadow games or something.
Tribute setting beasts, baby.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where nowadays, they're printing a lot of those cards where it's like, this is decent going first, but it has a bonus effect if you go second.
Yep.
I feel like Shaddoll's was kind of like an early version of that, where they're like, yeah, this is a fusion deck, but if you brick, you can set it, and they do something.
Yeah, it's also a kind of like genius design in the way that one of the biggest weaknesses of flip monsters, other than just being slow, is the fact that, like, you're setting it, and then your opponent has a whole turn to try and deal with it. But the Shaddoll cards all had an effect when they were sent to the graveyard by, like, a card effect, right? Like, when your opponent would try to get rid of it in another way, they would have another, a different effect, but still an effect, right? It wasn't as trivial to just, like, destroy it and then not worry about it.
I remember that's when Shaddoll's first came out. That was when my spirit deck suddenly, like, became completely useless. So I could Dark Dust Spirit, but it didn't do anything.
Oh yeah, it doesn't destroy his face downs.
It was like, what was it? That was what's the name of that set that had that and the Burning Abyss and
Duelist
the
Alliance.
Duelist Alliance. Oh my god. Hello.
Duelist Alliance format was like, suddenly board wipes don't mean shit because destroying cards doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
It's pendulum back. Or the BAs just float off of it anyway.
God, that
It's fine. I'm not angry. You're angry.
I had a unhinged comment. I think it was like a year or two ago. I made a YouTube video on it that somehow ended up with like hundreds of thousands of views. And it was this guy who would comment and post in every single Yu-Gi YouTuber's comment section this dossier on how to fix Yu-Gi-Oh! So I, on stream, of course, just got one guide, the biggest one guide of my life. I actually sat down and I read through it. And I thought one of the coolest suggestions, unironically, was that setting monsters shouldn't count towards your normal summon. So you should be able to set in the same way that you do spell and trap cards. So if you play a flip deck, you should be able to just like set 5 monsters and pass. I don't know if that would be a good rule change or not, but I thought it was interesting. Could be good.
Fun alt format to at least mess around with.
At least at first glance, I don't see a real problem with it.
Who knows?
Book of Taiyu becomes amazing.
I mean, at that point, Book of Taiyu is just double summon, right? You might as well just...
Well, that's the thing. If you've got a flip monster that like lets you plus when it's flipped up, then it's like you set it, Book of Taiyu, grab another card, normal summon, make a link or a synchro or something.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just say, by the way, like the immediate like thought is like, no, that would be too broken. You should make it so you can't tribute summon. Like, hello chat, like name a deck that is good that tribute summons. Like Flunder? Like, come on, dude. Like, what do you mean?
I'm gonna play a deck with 37 hand traps and 3 Light and Darkness Dragons. So when I'm just gonna set Ash and Veiler and tribute it for Rad.
Do you know how easy it makes it to summon towers? What do you?
Yeah, I guess.
Have you considered that? How are we gonna out towers this year? Or in current year?
I don't hate that suggestion. I don't think it would be a massive problem. No.
Contact fusing. Oh yeah, I could summon a Glad Beast turn 1. That's how they win games, Josh.
Oh, dude, I can make Heraclinos by setting 3 Glad Beasts.
Now that I think about it, unironically, ninjas would probably be fucking amazing.
Maybe. I don't know.
No, because you can instantly make that ninja that summons out of the deck if they activate any hand trap and then like have insulation for your plays.
Is Maizen like a contact fusion? Do you not need to use the insect girl to summon her?
No, it's just 2
attributing the above cards you can show. Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, how is that different from Bell being able to shuffle in 2 cards from their hand to instantly make Phantom before playing?
It's not.
See? It's fine. You just think of a meta deck and there it is. Boom, the deck already.
Like, ninjas have a 3-card combo now.
A 2-card combo.
Do that.
No.
2-card combo.
I didn't say it would be like broken. I said it would be very good. It'd be meta contender. Maybe. It'd be rogue.
Oh,
By the way,
maybe.
Ninja was like another example of a like a solid rogue deck. Like Ninja is like pretty decent, especially
I
during
love
when it
Ninja.
was. Yeah, I think it was like somewhat playable in Kashtira format because the
Yeah.
whole gimmick of flipping your opponent's monster is like very good against Kashtira. So
Yeah.
it was like kind of like a playable rogue deck.
Yeah.
But it's also like one of those decks that's like really hard to play, right? Like actually fully min-maxing all of your
Mhm.
disruptions
Yeah.
and flipping at the correct time and stuff. It's like that huge that gap that I mentioned before, where that payoff for like, you have to really master the format, not just your deck, to really know how to play a certain archetype. And then on top of that, it's like, well, it's just fundamentally weaker. So
I will say, but I'm not sure if we're going to get another chance to talk about this, but one other deck that I think is kind of underrepresented. I'm not sure if you would consider this rogue Scareclaw.
That's
yeah,
rogue.
so here's the thing with Scareclaw, right? Do you remember the example I gave of like playing Blue Eyes and then very slowly but surely you're cutting Blue Eyes cards?
Mm, yeah.
That's kind of the issue I think with Scareclaw. It's like, okay, well, what if I put like, like a couple of Kashtira cards? Let me play a couple more field spells, and then before you know it, you're basically just playing Vanadium.
Yeah.
The big thing about Scareclaw that I feel like everyone overlooked, and I think like if people ever want to revisit Snake Eye format for some reason, I don't know, people go back to the weirdest formats sometimes. But they've got that trap, Twin Saw, that a lot of
Yeah.
people overlook, which because on paper it looks
It's
like an
just-
Icarus attack.
Yeah.
But then you read the graveyard effect, and it's like, oh, it just negates all link monsters for the entire turn, just a lingering floodgate. You can activate it the same turn.
Yeah. Someone played
It's
that
like-
card against me. I read it for the first time at German Nationals when my opponent flipped it on me.
It's one of those things where, like, if you go first with Scareclaw, which I mean, it comes all across, most people treat it as like a go second OTK deck. But if you're going against Snake Eyes and you have Tryheart and that card in graveyard, like, I'm not sure what they can do. It's like Subversion exactly is their only real out.
How do you search it? Is it just the link one?
No, the link one
it's,
searches the field spell, right? It's like they got
Yeah.
like
Is it just Reichardt who searches it?
Rykard definitely
Yeah.
searches it. I don't know if they have another one.
Yeah, it's just Reichardt. But I mean, you have, every hand gets you to Reichardt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you're gonna get it.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Like I feel like every Yu-Gi-Oh deck that's like printed in the last like 5-ish years, you could probably sit down and make playable and viable with the right time and effort put into it. But sometimes a lot of these decks do just feel like worse versions of other decks and stuff. And I think that's what happens with no rotation. It's like, yeah, I could play Adamancipator today, which is like here's a bunch of like spamming like monster card deck stuff theme that it has, but ultimately what is Adamantipator trying to do? Well, it's just making Apollosa, Baron Savage, etc., etc. Like other decks do that better. So
the moment Adamancipator is mentioned on the podcast is usually the moment where we move on to the Patreon questions.
there it is. How do you feel about the fact that, and remember everyone who is listening, of course you can subscribe to our Patreon, please check the description down below. It is literally just a singular dollar to support the channel. So thank you for everyone who has been subscribed. We had a lot of new influx of Patreons and stuff. So thanks to everyone who has taken part. And of course, do make sure you join the Discord after you subscribe to the Patreon. How do you feel about the fact that in the past couple of years, the power gap between rogue decks and meta decks have shrunk a lot? And is that good or bad for the game? I don't know if that actually has happened, but what do you think, Mr. Hardleg?
Like the power gap between rogue and meta has grown in the last few years.
That's how I feel.
It feels like even when I started Master Duel, there were a lot more decks that were viable, and then over time, it's become more and more difficult. I've had to be more and more choosy about what decks I do because finding anything that can stand up against Snake Eye, where it's like, yeah, if you don't OTK them or get like 5 negates, they're going to have so much follow-up that they can do everything that they did the first turn again through at least one disruption, maybe 2.
So I think that the best explanation for this is in some ways the gap has kind of closed, but outside of specifically the meta decks. What I've noticed is, especially in TCG right now, I think if you take away Fiendsmith and Snake Eye, you actually have a really diverse meta.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like just good decks outside of the top tier. So I don't know. Maybe it is happening. It's just that
I think that's what they're referring to.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
once you do get past those first two, like the amount of rogue decks that are available, or maybe not even rogue, what I would classify as like casual. The amount of casual decks that can like put up a fight against each other is like pretty huge.
Yeah.
Especially with stuff like, Vernisylph, where it's just like every Earth deck gets a whole bunch of monster reborns now. Good luck.
Hmm. Yeah, it's weird because you definitely, I think you could argue both ways. Like for example, in the recent years, we've had a couple of formats that have definitely been among the more diverse formats in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Like you think of like 2022 Sword Soul Despia, but there's like a bunch of other stuff you can play realistically. We've had the same just recently before Snake Eyes Dominance, right? You look at like the format when it was Unchained, Rescue Ace, Lab, and then a lot of other stuff. I feel like it's more so that the tier 2 decks have been eating very good recently in recent Yu-Gi-Oh years.
Yeah.
I think the gap between tier 2 and tier 1, that's the one that's gotten smaller simply because we have so many functioning tier 2 decks that can realistically top events, even win events, even when there are top tier decks in the format. I don't know if it's true for like rogue decks, because I wouldn't classify any of those decks as rogue. Like the stuff that was viable during Unchained format, I don't think that's rogue. Like I don't think Vanquish Soul was a rogue deck at that time with like multiple in top cut of YCS Bologna, for example, or like Fire King as well. Like the structure Fire King deck, super cool, but was that a rogue deck? We had like 3 or 4 at top YCS Bologna. Like I don't know if that counts as rogue.
I think again, rogue kind of, you have to have that representation or lack of representation.
Yeah.
If something shows up as a one of, then it's like, okay, well that's a rogue deck.
Yeah. So I think it's, for me personally, the way I interpret it is like tier 2 has been getting a lot more competent at beating top tier decks with a realistic chance. Obviously, depending on the format, like what I'm saying is not true during tier Shizu format. But like generally, there's a lot of competent tier 2 decks. I don't know about like what the situation, like the rogue decks have always been down there, it's always like by definition, if the gap is closing, are they still rogue decks,
Yeah. I think, I don't know, I almost feel like rogue is also more viable when the format itself is flatter, if that makes sense. Like if you have more top decks. I'm thinking the thing about the last couple years, and maybe I mean I'm not super familiar with TCG, but I feel like almost every format has been like there's been a top deck or like 2 top decks specifically. It feels like it's been a while since we've had that Duelist Alliance style format or the Toss format where like 4 wildly different decks are all represented at the top.
But wouldn't you say that it's probably easier for a rogue deck to succeed if there's only one deck that you really need to counter? Like, wouldn't it be simpler to bust out a rogue deck during tier Shizu format and just be like, okay, my rogue deck can play Shifter, so I have a realistic chance to beat the best deck in the format?
So that's the thing is, rogue decks can perform better during those formats because yes, they can. You do have targeted decks. You have stuff like Exo Sister that completely shuts down some of those archetypes. But if your deck isn't exactly one that shuts down the graveyard or plays Shifter, you can't. So the rogue decks that can play, much better, but the amount of rogue decks is far fewer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think, at least for me, the most fun ones have been like the diversity, because why would a diverse format exist? A diverse format exists because the power difference between top to middle is nowhere near as much of a significant chasm as we have with something like, Snake Eye to, Labyrinth or something today. So naturally, those decks can take advantage and do better. And that's what I really like, because you don't necessarily... Because I think, like, it's really bad when tier 0, I think, exists generally, because you might have a good mirror match, but it also makes the rest of the game really bad, because then you have these decks that are targeting the top deck, but how do you target the top deck? The answer is always floodgates, right? And that's not fun. I don't think so.
It's during those tier 1, tier 2, or tier 0 formats, oftentimes everything just consolidates into like meta or anti-meta specifically.
That's,
and you have
like
much
you're not
more
really
diversity.
playing a rogue deck, you're playing an anti-meta deck, which is a different thing, kind of.
All right. We did basically answer most of the Patreon questions. So over the course of this whole podcast. So shout outs to
You're
everyone who has been
welcome.
taking part in that discussion. Yeah, no. So this has been a real treat. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we got a lot of random and different, wide, varied amount of topics covered today.
Yeah.
So that's always really fun. And
I had fun. Hopefully
yeah.
everyone else enjoyed. If not, I'm
We're-
sorry for losing you patrons.
No, all good. Thank you for being on the podcast. And I'm also noticing recently when we have these guests that are interesting to talk to, we keep making these like 2 hours plus. Let me know what you guys think about that, I suppose.
I didn't even notice. Wow.
No, this is also 2+ hours, and the Matt Bell one last
Wow.
week was also way over 2. So
You're
I guess
welcome.
we are up for feedback. If this is something you guys like, we can do this probably every time. If it's something that is we're hitting the point where it's too long for you guys, then also let us know that. But I think so far the feedback has been good. Just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah.
I'm sure my fans won't mind a 2-hour-long video. It might be a little short for them, but you
Yeah.
know.
this is the abridged version of Hard Legs content.
Yeah.
The director's cut.
All right. Peace out, everyone. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to follow or whatever if you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., wherever that might be. Hard Legs socials and stuff will, of course, be in the description as always. So go check out his channel for some very, very cool long-form Macedo rogue-related content.